He arrived in Hong Kong under a low ceiling of summer cloud, the kind that turns the harbor into a slab of tin and makes sound travel like a rumor. Adrian Lau, 38, a meticulous sound recordist who never trusted silence, stepped off the airport express with 2 Pelican cases and a commission he had accepted against his better judgment: produce a podcast episode called The True Horror Behind the Eye. The brief wanted him to braid fact and feeling, to find what the Pang brothers' 2002 film left unsaid about seeing what others refused to see. It was supposed to be simple: location sound, a few interviews, a careful script, but the assignment lodged in him like grit. The Eye had premiered in Hong Kong in May 2002, directed by Danny and Oxide Pang and starring Angelica Lee. He remembered the first time he saw it, a university screening where the audience stopped breathing during the bus stop scene, when a violin note stretched out like a thread that might snap at any second. That wasn't gore. It was patience weaponized. He had always believed that in this city, fear announces itself as scent first, then as sound, and only then as shape. His first recording was practical and superstitious at once, the hum and laddered clack of the central mid-levels escalator. He rode it upward from Queens Road Central, microphones hidden under his collar like a private vow, letting the machine's steady E-note lay a tonal bed for whatever the story would become. The escalator system, the world's longest outdoor covered escalator, opened in 1993, more than 800 meters of covered belts and walkways, reversed direction as it always did, pulling office workers downhill in the morning and pushing them uphill toward home after 10. Adrian logged it all. The faint beep of octopus cards from the street below, a child's counting rhyme clipped in half by a parent's hush, the bounce and settle of rubber steps as rain began to pepper the canopy. Standing still, he felt the city flow around him, the way a river leaves a stone polished but unchanged. In his notebook he wrote, "In Hong Kong, movement is the anesthesia. Horror is what you feel when the anesthesia wears off." The assignment wanted a thread that could hold a chronicle, so Adrian chose a chronology he could trust, day by day, place by place, sense by sense. He booked an interview slot at Queen Mary Hospital on Pak Fu Lam Road, the hilltop complex that had opened in the 1930s and grown into a small city of its own, one of the tallest hospital blocks in Asia, rising like an organ pipe above the trees. It wasn't because he thought hospitals were haunted. It was because hospitals are where waiting becomes architecture. Waiting rooms so brightly lit you can see your mistakes reflected in the floor wax, corridors that smell like citrus disinfectant and starch, stairwells that collect the footfalls of people trying not to hope too hard. If the Eye had given the world a clean superstition, see through another's cornea, see another world, then hospitals were where the clean edges frayed into lived complication, the names read aloud at dawn rounds, the tea in paper cups cooling too fast, the way a visitor leaves carrying less than they brought. Hospitals taught you to hear air conditioning not as background, but as breath. He kept the first day simple. He took the island line toward Wan Chai, detoured on foot through Ship Street where banyan roots pry at brick like old fingers, and stood across from Nam Ku Terrace, the 1918 red brick mansion that neighborhood rumor has never quite forgiven. He didn't trespass, he didn't need to. The point was to listen. A window rattled somewhere deep, a mina complained from a hidden beam. A scooter took the corner too fast and left burnt rubber in its wake, a smell like old storms. On his recorder, you could hear the difference between silence and waiting. He noted that difference, then moved on, climbing west in the evening toward High Street in Sai Ying Pun, where the preserved granite facade of the old mental hospital fronts a community complex that serves the living now. Teenagers posed for photos beneath the arches. Somewhere inside, a trolley wheel squeaked over tile in a rhythm that sounded almost like handwriting. He gathered just enough sound to build a spine: escalator, street, facade, footfall, city breath. Then he did the thing he always did before a big project. He sat alone on a tram as it stitched the north shore of Hong Kong Island and let the city remind him of what it remembers. Incense that lingers even after a temple closes, the iodine tang of the harbor when the wind shifts, the faint pearly chime of a crosswalk that makes you think of someone who never came back from lunch. He decided his script would keep dialogue spare, only what a true story needs. The rest would be the music of places, a chronicle of regret carried by smell, of memory carried by sound, of loneliness carried by structures built to move us along. That night in his rental in Sheung Wan, he revised the outline into a calendar. Day 2 would be Queen Mary Hospital, corridors, lifts, the view east toward Aberdeen Channel, and a short, careful conversation with a transplant coordinator about what patients report after surgery, the documented stuff and the rumored stuff. Day 3 would braid the city's most public whispers, tracing how certain addresses, repeated often enough, Nam Ku Terrace in Wan Chai, High Street in Sai Ying Pun, turn into shorthand for everything people would rather not say aloud. Day 4 would move north toward Plover Cove Country Park, to Bride's Pool near Tai Mei Tuk, where a legend about a bride drowned in her sedan chair keeps drawing hikers who swear that a particular perfume sometimes rises from cool air where no one stands. He would record water on rock and let the space between splashes carry the story of waiting. 4 days, 4 movements, 4 chances to prove that the real horror behind the eye isn't a ghost eager to perform, but a city that keeps its dead in the way it organizes its living. In queues, in corridors, in escalating belts of motion that pretend to have no memory at all. He powered down the recorder, and the room expanded around him. He could smell rain. He could hear the harbor hold its breath. He slept, and the city stayed awake. Day 3 began with the city already speaking. Adrian left Shengwan before the tram bells learned their own names and walked east, choosing streets that still remembered last night's rain. He wanted rumor mapped to stone, smell braided with address. He started where he had stood 2 days earlier, at the bend of Ship Street, facing the red brick shoulders of Nam Ku Terrace. The house did not perform. It never had. It simply stood, 2 stories of Shanghai-inspired brickwork behind trees that had learned discretion. The facts would be easy to say on air. Nam Ku Terrace, number 55. Ship Street, a Grade 1 historic building likely erected between 1915 and 1921, its early owners, a 2 family who moved in an era when Wan Chai's slopes were quieter than their reputations now suggest. The rumor would be harder, that a place becomes haunted when a city insists on rehearsing one story more than any other. He jotted the certified part first, dates and grade are furniture that make narrative honest, then added a note in the margin, "Ghosts are the price we pay for repetition." He did not cross the gate. He did what sound recordists do. He waited. The air carried cut grass from a municipal verge and a breath of incense from somewhere uphill, as if the neighborhood had taken a shallow, polite sip of memory. A scooter's engine climbed the slope, coughed once at the corner, and stilled. Somewhere within the shuttered house, glass ticked as it adjusted to shade. The famous incident, the one every taxi driver can summarize, did not need graphic retelling. The single responsible sentence would be enough. In 2003, multiple local papers reported that a group of secondary school students entered the house at night, after which several were taken to hospital in distress and the police were called. That the episode became a civic myth so fast told him more about the city than any apparition would. A rumor grafts itself to a place. A headline gives the rumor a passport. The place wears it the way brick wears humidity. He circled the pavement twice, took 2 minutes of air, leaf scrape, distant bus, a rolled metal shutter, a bird correcting its pitch, and left the house to its quiet. From Wan Chai, he traced the island's western cheekbones, walking into Sai Ying Pun until High Street erupted ahead like a granite sentence. The preserved facade of the old mental hospital, arches stately as a procession, fronted the Sai Ying Pun community complex now, a palimpsest whose edge had been carefully kept. He had prepared the facts. The building first completed in 1892, its later decades spent as mental health wards and then an outpatient clinic, left vacant for years in the 1970s and 80s, finally repurposed in the late 1990s, the granite face and arched veranda preserved as a declared monument while a practical complex rose behind it. The civic timeline soothed him. It said, cities can change their minds while keeping a face. Still, High Street had gathered tales, the way long vacancies become breeding grounds for voices, and Adrian treated the distance between story and plaque like a respectful silence at a funeral. He pressed record at his chest and let the building give him what it was willing to give. Footsteps across tile, a receptionist's courteous woo-guy, the wheel of a trolley finding then losing a rhythm across grout lines. The old rumor about headless figures remained where rumors belong, outside his microphone's reach. The present made its own weather. Mothers scheduling clinic visits, a delivery slip creased against a clipboard, a tube of hand gel clicked open and shut like punctuation. For the script, he wanted to braid these addresses with smaller ordinary alters to waiting. He took the tram 1 stop too far on purpose and stepped into the shade by Manmo Temple on Hollywood Road, not to claim it as haunted, but because the coils of incense make the air heavy with committed time. The temple did what hospitals do, but with permission slips signed by the heart. It gave waiting a shape and a fragrance. He drew a thin, unshowy line in his notes to connect temple smoke and hospital disinfectant. Two different hopes, same instrument, time. He wrote the sentence he'd been avoiding all morning. What people call ghosts might be the sound of a city keeping its appointments with memory. He allowed himself one fragment of dialogue, clipped in private, the way rumor always is, "You came back." He didn't write who said it, he didn't need to. In the afternoon, he returned to Ship Street, not to double down but to seek a cross-current. On a lamppost near Namku Terrace, a municipal notice about redevelopment had yellowed at the corners. Opposite, a tiny cha-chan tang exhaled pineapple bun and boiled tea. He let the smells argue. In his headphones, the house said nothing and the cafe said everything, and the argument itself became the point. Rumor survives best where people must pass daily to do ordinary things. He sketched a line of structure for the episode. Segment A, the escalator that moves time. Segment B, the hospital that holds time. Segment C, the houses where time pools and people stare into it. The outline reduced anxiety the way a smooth stone reduces a pocket's noise. As dusk leveled the island into a single plane of navy and neon, he rode a bus north toward the University of Hong Kong and got off 2 stops early, walking down Sassoon Road until the hill conceded a view of Green Island's lighthouse. He thought about the film that brought him here, not its plot so much as its premise, the clean myth that a corneal transplant could grant a second sight. How tempting to put that myth on top of Ship Street and High Street and tie them into one bow. He refused the easy knot. Instead, he wrote how clinicians explained it yesterday. High success rates, ordinary medicine, and how rumors try to remake anatomy into metaphor. Somewhere between those two, a city persuades itself to keep moving. He wrote a sentence he would keep. A transplant is a pact with strangers. A rumor is a pact with neighbors. Both demand we handle the living with care. Night made the city audible. From his bench near Pak Fu Lam's switchbacks, he could name the layers. The distant low thunder of buses cresting a hill, caged birds chattering as their owners covered them against mosquitoes, the harbor at an inhale it might never release. He counted the seconds between 2 soft metal knocks and realized they were the accidental duet of a flagpole and a loose street sign. He waited for the interval to hold steady, then took the microphone down. In that contained quiet, it came again. The ghost that belonged to him alone, if ghosts can be said to belong to anyone. Not a figure, never a figure. A scent, precise enough to separate itself from the evening, the powdery sweetness of an old bridal perfume. It arrived like a footnote from another district. It said, without words, tomorrow, north. He closed his eyes and let the association line up by itself, because he had already drawn tomorrow's map. Plover Cove Country Park. Tai Mei Tuk as a comma. Bride's Pool as a sentence nobody finishes. The city had given him enough addresses to earn the legend. He would handle it the way he handled hospitals, with dates and paths and a promise to keep the camera steady while the water moved. He returned to Sheungwan by tram, standing at the back platform as if on the balcony of a moving house. On Daevu Road West, dried seafood trade perfumed the night with iodine and persistence. He wrote in the margin of the day's page, regret, memory, scent, sound, waiting, loneliness. He drew a line through loneliness, then rewrote it as alone together, because that felt truer to the rooms he'd visited today, waiting areas and verandas and pavements where people enact privacy in public. He thought of a single responsible way to say the famous house's name on air without sensationalizing anything. Ship Street, a Grade 1 house with a complicated past and a documented 2003 incident that the city will not forget. He thought of a single responsible way to say High Street, a preserved facade that folds history into service. He thought of tomorrow's script pages waiting blank for water sounds. He carried the empty to bed like a promise. Before sleep, he opened his laptop long enough to check routes, because an honorable haunting shares its directions. MTR to Tai Po Market, bus 275R on weekends, or a village taxi when the bus naps, a path that strolls past the 1906 stone bridge, and 2 waterfalls, Bride's Pool and Mirror Pool. The plan reduced the next day's superstition to distances and steps, merciful, practical. He closed the lid, and the perfume returned, evacuated the room in a single kind draft, and left behind only the ordinary city smell of damp concrete taking its time to dry. He whispered, Just once, because superstition is also a rhythm. Wait for me. And because the city answers in infrastructure, a tram bell 2 streets away tapped the same 2 notes it had given him the night he first arrived. Not a warning, not a welcome. A metronome for keeping faith with what must be done. Day 4 began with logistics, the kind that strip a legend down to bus numbers and footpaths, so the superstition has to earn its keep. Adrian took the MTR East Rail to Tai Po Market, then checked the board. On Sundays and public holidays, the 275R bus runs out toward the hills, stopping at places whose names already sound like stories: Bride's Pool, Wu Khao Tang, Tai Mei Tuk. Weekdays, a green minibus 20R makes the trip more grudgingly every hour or so. He wrote the numbers as if they were part of ritual: 275R on holidays, 20R on leaner days. A city that believes in directions also believes in endings. The ride north unspooled shopfronts into bamboo and then into granite until the signs conceded a different scale: Plover Cove Country Park, a ravine cut into the Patsin Leng uplands, an old road that learned to follow water. At the trailhead, he stepped onto stone that had carried a century of curiosity. The first landmark was a small, handsome span. The Bride's Pool Stone Bridge, dating to 1906, built to make crossing between the villages of Wu Khao Tang and Chung Mei less a gamble in bad weather. He stood in its crown and let the sound gather him. Water-fingering rock, hikers' laughter braided with Cantonese and English, the researcher's pencil-sharp tap of a camera lens cap against a strap. Farther in, the trail bent toward the falls themselves, the famous drop, whose name, they say, was born on a night when rain made visibility a rumor, and porters slipped under the weight of a wedding sedan chair. The sedan and bride tumbled. The river finished the decision. The pool inherited her title and a voice it has never quite stopped using. Legends obligate restraint, so he let the facts speak in second position. The waterfall lives in a narrow ravine northwest of Plover Cove Reservoir. Nearby, a taller cascade earns the name Mirror Pool, its broad white torrent veering across a rock face like a brushstroke at the end of a long sentence. The day held its breath while he recorded. He moved slowly because some places punish haste by refusing to give you their air. Between the 2 falls, a concord settled. The whoosh of white water pressed into a rhythm that matched almost obscenely the escalator's E-note from day 1 and the hospital vent from day 2. He stepped off the path and let a secondary sound take shape, the faint powdery sweetness of a perfume that did not belong to insect repellent or to anyone within sight. He had promised himself to be literal. Hikers wear cologne, scent drifts, memory cheats. And yet the smell carried a contour as distinctive as a voice. He set the recorder on the bridge railing, capsule sheltered from spray, and took 3 minutes of river, the way archivists take 3 minutes of testimony. The stone under his palms was warm. A dragonfly mapped its own errand above the pool. A teenager's joke bounced off the ravine and came back kinder. From somewhere in the spray, a sentence of dialogue reached him, brief as a breath. "You kept the appointment." He declined to turn. There are kinds of courtesy one offers to the living and to the legend alike. The path to Mirror Pool grew steeper and more certain. When the fall revealed itself, high, white, its water veering left as if obeying a remembered instruction, he caught the sound a reel makes when it trusts what it's hearing. The tourism board's copy had said the drop here is taller than the one at Bride's Pool, about 35 meters, an assertion the eye is happy to believe because height isn't the measure that matters. What mattered was repetition becoming care. The falls wrote the same consonant over and over onto stone. Hikers stopped and left space for one another to look. A woman in a yellow cap lowered her head and touched a damp rock with 2 fingers as if to sign her name where the water would wash it away. He considered whether to include the number in his script, 35 meters, or leave it at taller, then wrote both to give himself a choice in the edit. Either way, the day was doing what the hospital did in a different key, teaching people to wait together without complaint. He backtracked to the 1906 bridge at a deliberate pace so the scent, if it wanted to, could catch up. In his headphones, the composition was exact. A low, velvet roar, undercut by the granular chatter of small water on small stone, the percussive click of a trekking pole, a bird's high staccato clearing its throat for an announcement it chose not to make. The perfume returned. Powder, not floral, a room of old lacquer note that sometimes rises near tin how altars and sometimes from wardrobes that keep secrets. He could have spoken to it, but the show he was making wasn't about him. It was about the eye and the discipline of not dramatizing what doesn't require drama. He made one concession to superstition. He placed his right palm flat on the bridge rail and said quietly enough that only the microphone would know, "I'm here." The water took the words the way an escalator takes a footfall, completely, without residue. He left the pool by the practical route because reverence and timetables often share a verb. The trail shoved him back onto Bride's Pool Road, where 275R runs its holiday loop and the 20R offers a weekday negotiation with time. He stood near the bus sign and watched the ordinary heroism of public transport fulfill one more promise. Bus pulls in, doors open, drivers exchange a nod that contains a city's whole courtesy. On the ride back toward Tai Po, the day's scenes began to align themselves in his editor's eye. The escalator's tide, Queen Mary's breath, Ship Street's brickwork, High Street's granite face, the white falls writing patience onto basalt, the small speech he didn't mean to make on a stone bridge built the year before the first Model T crossed America. The scent persisted as a thin border around the afternoon, then became suggestion, then became nothing but memory doing its exact job, permitting him to leave while refusing to let him forget how he'd arrived. That night in Shengwan, he did what a sound recordist does to end a field day. He built a room from the files. The escalator motor's E became the bass note. The hospital's waiting room vent supplied an alto that felt like a hand on a shoulder. Ship Street's hush threaded the middle. The trolley wheel at High Street tapped a pulse so human it felt illegal to reuse. The falls laid in a high white ribbon that never became melodrama. Over this, he placed a factual, almost brittle narration. Dates of buildings, bus routes, the year the stone bridge was set into the stream, the outline of a clinical chronology for corneal transplants in Hong Kong. Then, he spoke the portion that had pulled him toward the job in the first place, a brief history of the film that made the question famous. The Eye, directed by Danny and Oxide Pang, premiered in Hong Kong on 9th of May 2002, starring Angelica Lee. The notion that a borrowed cornea could redraw a person's world moved from rumor to pop myth overnight. Interviews over the years have mentioned a real-life case as an inspiration, a news story about a young woman who died soon after a corneal transplant, which the directors pursued in their own way on screen. He said it carefully, and he said what clinicians still say. Patient reports of post-transplant change exist, but cellular memory remains unproven and disputed. The mind is suggestible, medication is potent, trauma is noisy, and yet the stories remain stubborn. He felt responsible for the sentence that held both things at once. He re-listened to the falls and realized he had made a structure out of verbs: move, wait, remember, repeat. In the city's grammar, ghosts are not permissions to misbehave, they are assignments. They ask the living to do simple, difficult things at scale, build corridors that help breath behave, preserve a facade so a neighborhood can keep a face while learning new work, leave a red brick house alone until you know how to talk about it with respect, maintain a trail and a century-old bridge because people will walk out of their lives to practice patience by water. He kept dialogue spare. He allowed only 3 sentences to remain, each placed like a cent. Do you see me? You kept the appointment. I'm here. They felt less like a conversation and more like an exchange of vows, all the city can ever allow between the living and their dead. In the final hour before sunrise, he read his script aloud once in the empty kitchen, a rehearsal for grief that was not his and therefore demanded more care. The edit ended where the day had begun, on movement that remembers. Over the closing credits, the escalator's motor and the waterfall resolved into a single unshowy chord. He let it run a little too long. Not because he wanted to make anyone shiver, but because patience, properly recorded, sounds like reassurance. He closed the laptop. The room exhaled. Somewhere outside, a tram tapped 2 notes and waited for the city to answer. On his way to bed, he placed the recorder by the window, not to trap anything but to be fair to whatever passed, a breeze that smelled faintly of joss sticks, a van's tailgate thud, footsteps that refused to be sorted into categories. He slept lightly. The city shouldered the rest. When the episode published, the title felt less like a hook and more like a confession. The true horror behind the Eye. He had not promised monsters. He had promised this, that horror in Hong Kong is built from what the living do well when they are watched, by ancestors, by neighbors, by places they think they know. It is built from regret handled at room temperature, from memory curated by infrastructure, from scents that return without permission, from sounds that keep their appointments on time. He wrote a single line in the show notes and left it plain. Addresses, dates, routes, and a bridge from 1906, with thanks to the people who maintained them. Then, he took the tram east and stood on the back platform as the city stitched itself awake, the rails writing their old consonant under his shoes. He did not ask for a sign. He didn't need one. The perfume lifted, brief as a bow, and was gone.